Welcome everyone to this video on market hours. In this video, I'll be talking firstly about why it's important to study market hours, then the main sessions that exist and the opening and closing times of them, and then what actually happens in a session. I mean, why is it so important and what creates this session? The best times to trade the Forex market, and then finally, I'll wrap up this session with an example on 2-on-2 trading. So let's get started. So why is it important to study market hours? The first reason is to understand the best financial opportunities and when they occur. So as you know, the Forex market is a 24-hour a day market. There are sessions constantly open. Although it's open 24 hours a day, there are better times to trade than others. So let's say, for example, you want to trade the pound. It will be better to trade the pound during the London session. And let's say you want to trade the US dollar. It will be better to trade the US dollar during the New York session. So I'll be talking more about that later. And the second point is to know when liquidity, volatility, and spread in the market change. So there are times in the day when the Forex market is the busiest. And when it's the busiest, liquidity is higher and spread is lower. And other times during the day when volatility is higher, more uncertainty exists in the market and spreads increase. So we all need to be very careful about these sessions and the exact times that volatility is higher and liquidity is higher, etc. And lastly is to know when the major currencies are traded mostly. And now I'm going to move on to sessions. So when you want to open a position in a Forex market, there are two main things that you need to bear in mind. The first thing is the session that you're trading in, and the second thing is the currency pair that you want to trade. So let's go through four of the sessions. So we have the New York session, the London session, Tokyo session, and Sydney session. Now, New York session is used interchangeably with the North American session, and that's because New York is the biggest financial center in North America. But it also contains Canada as well. So the currencies that you would be familiar with in North American session are the US dollar and the Canadian dollar. And now with the London session, sometimes it's used interchangeably with the European session, the countries in the EU. So the currencies that will appear in the European session are the euro, the pound, and the Swiss francs, the main ones. And with Tokyo and Sydney, they can, and other countries like China, New Zealand, they can be combined into the Asian session. But Tokyo is the main financial center when it comes to Forex, with regards to the Asian session. So when someone mentions the Asian session, the typical session that will be associated with the Asian session is the Tokyo session. And the main currencies of the Asian session are the Japanese yen, the Australian dollar, and and the Chinese yuan. So those are the sessions, and you just need to get familiar with these words sometimes. So if you hear, for example, the European session, you know what they're talking about now, and it's just helpful. So now we're just going to move on to session hours. So now I'm going to be talking about the opening and closing times of the sessions which we explained earlier, namely the London, New York, Tokyo, and Sydney sessions. And the reason why there's four columns is because the first one is for session, the second one is for EDT, which is Eastern Daylight Time, and this is the summertime in Eastern America. So cities such as New York, Washington, Philadelphia, Michigan, and Florida, and even parts of Canada, so Quebec, Toronto. And the third column is for GMT. So this is Greenwich Mean Time, and this is the primary reference of timing which countries all around the globe use. The last column is British Summertime, BST, and this is obviously 1 hour forward from GMT, and this is the time that I personally use during the summertime, and this is the reason why I put it here. So let's start off with the session. So we have the London session, New York session, Tokyo session, and Sydney session. And I'm going to start from the Sydney session and the last column because that's the time that I personally use. So the Sydney session in the UK starts at 10 p.m. and closes at 7 a.m. And GMT time, because it's 1 hour forward, BST is 1 hour forward. Let's go 1 hour backwards. So this is 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. And EDT is 4 hours behind GMT. So this is 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. in Eastern America. Now, next is a Tokyo session, and that starts at 12 a.m. in London and ends at 9 a.m. And then GMT time, that's 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. and EDT 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. in America. And New York, well, in London, it opens at 1 p.m. to 10 p.m. and GMT is 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. and in local time in New York, it's 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. London time, BST is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So this is the time that I wake up. This is my local time. And GMT time, it's 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. And EDT time, it's 3 a.m. to 12 p.m. And you must be thinking, what is EDT, GMT, BST? Are these important? Well, when I was learning about Forex ages ago, this was very relevant, and I still use this understanding now. And EDT is Eastern Daylight Time, GMT is Greenwich Mean Time, and BST is British Summer Time. And I even give an additional lecture. I'm going to give an additional lecture explaining this, the importance of it, and GMT especially talking about its importance as the primary timing reference. So go ahead and watch the extra video after this video. It's just additional, it's not mandatory, it's not part of the Forex course in order for you to become a Forex pro, but it just really gives you an understanding of the timings around the world. And now we're going to move on to what happens in a session. Why is a session important? What constitutes a session? What happens in a session? So yeah. So the best way to explain what happens in a session is to give you an example of what happens in the London session. And this more or less can be applied to other sessions such as New York session, etc. So the session is basically when big companies make their day-to-day transactions. And this includes hedge funds, investment banks, and even the central bank. And with regards to the central bank, the Bank of England actually opens from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And this is more or less the active part of the London session. And moving on to the next point, a lot of activity occurs within the first 3 hours of opening, and this is general actually. This applies to most of the sessions, but I also noticed that within the first hour of opening the London session, people are getting to their offices, they're starting to analyze the market, they're just getting ready to execute their trades. So after these 3 hours, once they've executed their trades, they're just waiting for the progress of it. They take a break, and then after this break, by that time they take that break, they go back onto the forex market, and this is when the American session or New York session opens. And then now the fluctuation in liquidity increases within the pound against the dollar currency pair and the euro against the dollar currency pair. So they literally come alive at this time. This is the busiest time in the forex market, and the euro USD is the most liquid, most bought and sold currency pair. And another thing I'd like to say is that the Tokyo session closes 1 hour after the London session opens. And although it might seem that because they overlap, in a sense, there'll be a lot of liquidity during that 1 hour. But the thing is that because the Tokyo session is about to close, and the London session, people are just getting to the offices, just about to start, there isn't as much liquidity within that session as there is, for example, in the New York and London session. And this is because the New York session starts like halfway in the European session. So this accounts for the increase in volatility and liquidity of the market. And moving on to the next point, the reason why a lot of activities occur within the first 3 hours is also because of there's a release of governmental reports and economic data. So it might be inflation rates, it might be interest rates, something like along those lines. So the UK's major data releases come out around 9:30 a.m. and sometimes a set of important data is released during a week. So people would be wondering why the London session is the most volatile session out of all the sessions. And there are a lot of explanations for this, and one of them is actually because when they release economic data, sometimes they release a bunch of important data within a week, and so that obviously causes the currency to fluctuate even more and to become even more volatile. So the in a sense the volatility of the London session actually increases. And so yeah, so this is roughly what happens during a London session, and I hope you do understand how important it is to understand that if you want to trade it in the pound, you should understand the London session and when economic data is released, because when important economic data is released, this definitely affects the fluctuation, the volatility of the pound. So now we're going to move on to when are the best times to trade the Forex market. So, when we looked at the table for the sessions and the opening and closing times, what I'm going to do now is present the same information but in a different form so as to be able to see the overlapping of sessions. Now, the numbers on top indicate the time in 24 hours, and on the left indicates the session. So let's take an example. So by the way, this is the BST time. So this is the British Summer Time. So in the UK, it's not GMT time or in America. So if you want to get this information in America, you just got to apply what you saw in the table and you can make your own one. So let's take an example for the Sydney timing. So it opens at 10 p.m. in London and closes at 7 a.m. And this is indicated by the yellow, if you like, crossing. And for the Tokyo time, it opens at 12 a.m. and closes at 9 a.m. So I hope you understand that. And now what I'm going to do is highlight the overlapping of different sessions. So now I'm going to highlight the Sydney and Tokyo overlapping. And now I'm going to highlight the Tokyo and London overlapping, that brief moment. And finally, London and New York session. And also notice that London actually joins the Asian session to the North American session. And in general, when you want to trade a currency pair, the best time to trade it is when, if possible, when the two currencies, their sessions exist at the same time. They're contemporaneous. So, for example, when I'm going to trade the Japanese yen against the Australian dollar, the best time when the spread is low, etc., would be when during this time when they're overlapping, and with the pound against the Japanese yen, the same thing. Although we did explain before that the liquidity is not as one would suppose it to be, and however the last overlap in the London and the New York session is known as the magic time. This is the busiest transaction time. This is the busiest overlapping, and this is when the liquidity of the market is at its highest, spread is lowest, and even the volatility of the market is at its highest. And you can trade the pound against the USD and even the euro, because remember this is also the European session is also open as well. So the euro USD trades. This is when the euro USD, which is the largest and the most traded currency pair, this is the predominant time that it's traded during this magic time. And think about this: you have the two of the greatest trading centers of the world um, occurring at the same time. The sessions occurring at the same time. This is the time that traders look forward to during their day, and this is an amazing time to be making profit from. And yeah, so I hope you learned something about that. And now I'm going to move on to more of the volatility of currency pairs. Yeah. So if you look at these graphs over here, what this shows is the average pip movement with regards to the currency pairs shown at the bottom during these three sessions, namely the Tokyo, London, and New York sessions. And from this graph, you can really deduce that the most volatile session at this point in time, obviously the market conditions change, but at this point in time that we're looking at this chart, the most volatile session is the London session, followed by the New York session and the Tokyo session. And the Sydney session is not shown here, but the Sydney session is the least volatile of the four. And also notice that the most volatile currency pair is the pound against the Japanese yen, obviously at this point in time. And obviously currency pairs fluctuate in their volatility, of course. And also the most liquid currency pair, of course, is the euro USD. And just in case you're a bit confused about volatility and liquidity, sometimes when I use them it can be confusing. So let me just briefly explain what volatility is. So it just means that a currency rate fluctuates dramatically or drastically, and the pip movement is high, price action is high. There is a lot of movements in the market, and liquidity is when there's many buyers and sellers, in other words. So when lots of people are conducting transactions on those currency pairs, you'd say that's a liquid currency pair. So that's basically it. And so I hope you've obtained some information about that chart. And now I'm going to go to my example on my iPad just to show you about the sessions and the volatility of the market during those sessions. So this is the 212 trading app. This is the pound against the USD, and what I'm going to show you is when the sessions are open, the disparity between the volatility at that time as opposed to when neither of the sessions are open, or when just a New York session is open. And the way I'm going to do this is, because we know that the New York session closes around 10 p.m. and the London session opens around 7:30 to 8 a.m., but the European session opens around 7 to 7:30 a.m. I'm going to draw trend lines just to show you just a movement of the currency rate during those times. So here it is from 10 p.m. I'm going to draw from 10 p.m. to the relative bearish trend, and then another one which is a bullish trend up to until 7 a.m. So this is during the quiet time, when neither sessions are opened. Now I'm going to draw trend lines for when the London session opens. So here is a trend line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to color in the trend line yellow. So this is the bullish part of the trend. And I'm going to color in yellow. And now I'm going to draw the bearish part, which closes at about 12 p.m. There's a bearish trend. But you can see already the activity, how active it is. And the amount that it changes, the volatility, the difference in volatility. So here we are. And finally, the last trend line is going to end at 5 p.m. because that's when the London session ends. So it's 5 p.m. is here. So that's a bearish trend, and you can just see the difference in volatility, and also the volatility actually continues until around 10 p.m. again, because even after 5 p.m. the American session, the New York session, is still open. So I hope that's given you some insight into the disparities in volatility and how important it is to trade when both the sessions are open, and the prospects in financial opportunities during those times. So I hope this video on market hours has been quite informative and has given you good information about the best times to trade in the forex market, what a session is, why we traded in sessions, when the sessions are open. And I also want to say that although you understood the best times to trade, but it also depends on your trading style. I mean, people who trade for months and they're open position for months, this would be less applicable than someone who trades four trades, 3-4 trades every day and expecting to make a short-term profit. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and in the next video after the GMT one, I'll be talking about forex brokers, and that's really important, really important. And I hope to see you in the next video.